Our first panelist is John MacDonald, who works with the Archdiocese of the Catholic Church of Edmonton. And I'm intrigued by bridge people. And John is a bridge person. What I mean by that is, for 15 years, he was a professional engineer. And in that time, he was very involved in consulting and traveled widely in his profession. He then went back and did some further training in the area of pastoral care and theology, and for the last 15 years has been with the Catholic Archdiocese of Edmonton, focusing on family-related support initiatives. When I asked him about what led to his change of career, he suggested two things. One is that the lifestyle that he had as a professional engineer was not very conducive to a happy family life. And then secondly, that he saw that there was a need within our faith community for people with the precision and training of a business nature, financial planning aspects that he had as an engineer. And I found it intriguing that a man of his stature in his profession as a professional engineer would make that amount of time and effort to change gears. And we're so delighted that you have done that, John, because you have a number of amazing stories to share with us about your work in the Catholic Archdiocese of Edmonton. John.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This is one of those events where you come to preparing to talk about things, and you find that everything that's gone on before you is talking about what you're planning to talk about. So it's, in that sense, it's not stealing my thunder, it's recognizing that we're all peeling the same thunder in the same storm. And for me, this has been very, very inspiring and moving to be present. Introducing congregations to pandemic preparedness plans. That's the title Mark put on my presentation. When Mark Paulin asked me to speak again on this topic this year, I was at first reluctant to do so. You see, I was invited to Edmonton a year ago, or to Winnipeg a year ago, and spoke on that issue. And at that time, I had just finished this book, working manual, facilitating tool called Parish Influenza Planning, Catholic Archdiocese of Edmonton, May 2007. Well, I returned from that conference, ready to rock and roll, figuring in the fall I'll be off and delivering this in parishes and doing all sorts of things. And guess what? It's still sitting on my desk. It hasn't gone anywhere. 1 year later, nobody wants it. Significant problem. So I figured, why would Mark want me to be here? I guess that's what I'm going to be here about. A couple of things. The first reason I decided to speak was because I can share with you the virtue of humility. It's so very true. If you really want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. The second reason is that this issue is important because we did not get it right the first time, we need to try it again. And also, my wife will attest to this. I'm an eternal optimist. She likes to tell people I'm like the little boy who gets a box of horse manure for his birthday present. It's in a nice, neat box. And immediately he opens the box and he's overjoyed and he's excited. And people are saying he's excited about horse manure, and then he says, I know where there's all this manure, there's got to be a pony around here someplace. Well, my wife Deb would describe me as the kid looking for the pony all the time. Anyway, I've done some investigation into this in my faith community and what's holding us up, and I've developed a bit of a short list, and I think I'll share that with you at the moment. But before I do, I'm going to give you a little insight into what my faith community looks like. I work directly for Archbishop Richard Smith, who's the CEO of our Edmonton area community. An archdiocese is merely a name designating relative importance among other dioceses that is assigned by Rome in our faith community. In our case, Edmonton got the arch designation over Calgary due to its prominence at the turn of the century, when the Catholic Church was being established in Alberta. In fact, 2012 will be our 100th anniversary of the Edmonton Archdiocese here in Alberta. Now, within this church we call Edmonton Archdiocese, geographically we're looking at border to border. Jasper is in our Archdiocese, so is Lloydminster. It goes to north of Edmonton, all the way south to Olds, Alberta, which is about 45 minutes north of here. So you can understand the geographic size. Within that Archdiocese, there's 42 Edmonton churches, 48 rural churches. So we're talking close to 90 churches altogether with about 80 pastors. Now, let me deal with the problems that emerge in this creature I call the Edmonton Archdiocese. Problem number one, how to convince 80 independent pastors that pandemic planning is a good idea and a worthwhile activity for them to invest their church's time and energy into. Problem number two, I found out recently that this idea was in serious competition with other church priorities, such as our social justice portfolios. I was told quite clearly that social justice issues such as homelessness, poverty, the world disasters such as Myanmar and the earthquakes in China are far more important and pressing. After all, they're in the news. And if it's in the news, we'll deal with it. For many, the pandemic is not on the front page, and therefore it's not on the front burner. In fact, for many, it's not even on the stove at all. So I found out. Problem three, this one is simply, I have no pandemic credibility. I have a graduate education in adult education and religious studies. So what have I got to tell churches about health and wellness in the context of a pandemic? The fourth problem I ran into is here we have a plain and simple truth, and that is it's costly to get all of this stuff going, doing, the resources and everything else, and quite frankly, I don't have a budget for it. It's an issue that the people who've organized this conference and the one in Winnipeg will surely be very familiar with, is we don't have the money to do what we'd really like to do in the way of education and resourcing. What are some of the solutions we're trying to work with? Let me deal with the funding one first, because this one touches my heart. I'm going to look at the last problem first, as I just mentioned. And I need to ask this question to begin with. Why is it that charitable nonprofit institutions are stretched to the limit and beyond to do things that are unquestionably beneficial to the secular society we are part of? It just seems that it is expected of us, yet few people actually have an idea of how much incredibly good and necessary work churches do and have done over the centuries. Let me explore a bit of history here. Based on history, governments and healthcare organizations should be knocking down our doors to bring churches on board when dealing with imminent disasters. Who are the people running the soup kitchens? Who were the first on the line at Hurricane Katrina? Who are the people looking at the food banks, the shelters, the clothing nooks, and the furniture banks, etc.? Most are solidly organized, run, and staffed by people of faith, communities who volunteer in helping those in need. That's us, guys. Our healthcare system itself owes its existence as well to the faith communities. Alan Blakely, the former NDP Premier of Saskatchewan, is rumored to have said that healthcare in Canada did not come from government. It got its roots and foundations in church basements all across the prairies. My father was in England during the Second World War. He never liked to speak much about it, but one memory of that destructive time, the Battle of Britain, that he did share was about the presence of the Salvation Army and how much their loving, courageous service and comfort meant to him at that time. My next door neighbor in Saskatchewan was a wonderful elderly Mennonite lady named Mrs. Siemens. She spent each winter doing many charitable deeds, including making many, many blankets for the MCC, the Mennonite Central Committee, who in turn shared them with the Third World, mainly South America. I relate these stories that are real memories and inspirations in my life to hopefully remind you of your own stories. They are stories about goodness, compassion, courage, and love. And they are stories about people of faith doing God's will. They are also facts the world needs to know about and appreciate. On a global scale, we have the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and more recently, the Red Crystal. These symbols are known throughout the world as representing care, compassion, and nonviolence. They are not religious organizations themselves, but the very choice of their symbols speak volumes about the inspiration, motivation, and presence they bring to the world. Hospitals are also the product of faith communities, although not so obvious today. The earliest known institutions aiming to provide care were Egyptian temples. Greeks and Romans had temples dedicated to a healer god as well. Again, I share these stories for two simple reasons. First, I want to locate our faith communities and churches solidly in the arena of caring for health and well-being of others, both locally and on the world stage. In times of disaster in particular, governments will provide organization and structure, and I think we've heard a lot of that today. It's happening, or it's already well happened. Healthcare professionals will provide healing and bodily repair and look after our bodily needs. And the churches are going to be left to provide the best part of humanity, That is care, compassion, and love. That's what takes place in a pandemic. Secondly, I want to advocate that we learn to blow our own horn about the good we do. We know we do good and necessary work, but who outside our own faith communities know what we do? Recently, one of our Edmonton parishes did a survey of some of the volunteer work they did, and this blew my mind. They looked at procuring, making up, and delivering food hampers for their local food bank. They estimated this took about 12 hours per food hamper. They figured they distributed 140 hampers last year for a total of 1,680 hours. And they assigned a nominal dollar value to this, just to get a cost estimate, of $10 an hour for their labor. That translates into $16,800 worth of free labor. The church does many other volunteer good works, and annually, they roughly estimate this would be easily valued at between $500,000 and $1 million worth of free labor in the community that they serve. This is one church in Edmonton, and a rough count in the Yellow Pages came up with 800 churches in the Edmonton area. If you double that for Calgary and double it again for the rest of the province, you're talking about 2,400 churches. And if you add that dollar figure to it, you're in the neighborhood of $120 to $240 million a year of free volunteer labor that our church and faith communities are providing to this society. Those are numbers that the government needs to hear. We need to be putting our efforts, not with a monetary value for our own self-worth, but to speak the language that they understand so well. Budgets, distribution of costs and cash and everything else, we should be in that. Further, in times of crisis, society knows we will be needed, so shouldn't the churches be automatically invited to sit at the planning table with government and healthcare world without having to pay their own way? Dr. Donato last night said yesterday that she would love to hear our ideas on helping and during a pandemic. My question is, why hasn't she had that opportunity to this date? Problem 3, as you may recall, is about credibility. This one has an obvious solution, and that is for our churches to partner up with healthcare professionals in their faith community. Contact regional health centers if you are unable to find someone in your faith community, but if you can find doctors or nurses or people of that nature in your faith community, you've already got a source of credibility to be able to spread this message within the faith community. The nursing profession is an obvious choice for me, but some of us are lucky enough to have a parish nurse in our community to work with. And I am very fortunate to have one here at the conference with today, and I'm going to love this, debriefing this conference with her and how we can make it move forward. I didn't have that luxury last year, but I am blessed and I thank God for it today. She is a nurse with many, many years of experience as an RN, and she is just finishing her parish nursing education at Concordia University. This is an incredible resource for churches. If you can catch one, make the most of it. Problem 4 is the competition, and this is the heart of maybe where I'm going today. I mentioned this issue to Marg a few weeks ago about how social justice was being thrown back in my face of saying this is more important. She sent me towards a book called Ethical and Legal Considerations in Mitigating Pandemic Diseases. They love nice titles. by authors Lemon, Hamburg, Sparling, Choffers, and Mack. In the chapter, Social Justice in the Global Context, page 178, they point out the obvious. Pandemic planning is radically about social justice for churches. When a pandemic hits, the interventions and resources we are talking about will not normally be available to the world's poor and marginalized. We only need to look at the present AIDS pandemic in Africa to see the truth of the statement. Ethical decisions on the distribution of interventions and resources will likely, when it comes to the poor and marginalized, fall in the laps of the churches. The people who are presently with the poor and marginalized in the soup kitchens and all the various things I mentioned earlier. Problem number one is engaging my pastors. Well, if problems 2 and 3 get resolved, there will likely be more receptive for starters. However, we can convince this community here, and unfortunately some of the key people have left, but maybe we can get the message out for an afterthought. If we can convince them to gather in Edmonton and do a similar conference in the months ahead, years ahead, we don't have that time, months ahead, that would be wonderful. The idea of an Edmonton conference has already received support from some of the people I work with in the Alberta Healthcare Corporation and Caritas in Edmonton. Interestingly, the Alberta Healthcare Corporation is very interested in bringing AIDS into this dialogue because it's an existing pandemic that's already raging around the world. Let me leave you with a few thoughts. Survey your faith community to get an idea of how much labor and value you share with the world around you. Perhaps someone could even secure a STEP grant and hire a graduate student for summer work to generate a report documenting church contributions in Alberta. You can even use the recently announced government donation matching policy for nonprofits. And that's a very supportive program if you take a look into it, but it does exist already. Think seriously about and offer your prayers for a conference in Edmonton, and establish communication links with your local healthcare community. Get to know them and discuss with them how your churches might get to play a part in the pandemic. In other words, we're going to have to open up this conference or this communication. They haven't. And lastly, if we do something in Edmonton, we'll take it to the next level, I hope, which is not necessarily having healthcare and government come and tell us what good things they're doing. We've got a sense of that, and we can DVD that for the people we're dealing with. What we need to do is have them come and talk about how they can resource us, how they can get us engaged, how they can open up and perhaps bring, as I mentioned earlier, they have incredible organization and administrative and development skills. We could use that. We're a bunch of good people doing good things, but we're not necessarily well organized. An event like this brings us all to the table, and we could be very, very effectively moved by some government intervention here. The same with the healthcare. They can resource us with good information, good knowledge, but we have to have them come and listen to us and engage them in how can we help them. We don't want to get in their way when a pandemic strikes. We want to be part of the solution, not just another problem for them to deal with. I can't help but see the footprints of Christ and the fingerprints of the Holy Spirit all over the world today, in general, and in this conference in particular. We are all called to a unity, that oneness Christ prayed for to the Father. Hear again the words of Mike Schuster's last 2 lines from last night. Unify, remove our stubborn pride, work in our hearts and lives to unify. And the last thing I'll leave you with is my favorite expression that I learned from the Eastern traditions. I believe it's Hindu, and it's a greeting. Namaste. The word namaste is an incredibly powerful greeting, and if we could all greet each other in a like manner, it would be wonderful, because namaste means, I honor in you the place where we are both one. Now, if you think about it, there's only one unity in all of us.